This is Political Animals.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Political Animals, the news and editorial segment of Commoners Podcast. This week, Adam will be delivering an editorial on the state of the Labour Party in Scotland and London Mayor Sadiq Khan's comments on Scottish nationalism. If my voice sounds a little weak today, please bear with me. I've been struggling with a cold for the last week. It's true what they say, you'll never be as sick as when your kids get you sick. They are walking, talking petri dishes. All of them. That being said, let's get to the news. This past weekend, the Democratic National Committee elected establishment favorite and former Labor Secretary Tom Perez as their new chairman. The result has been criticized by many progressives within the party who hope to see the more liberal Keith Ellison elected. The move appears to confirm the DNC's unwillingness to move further to the left in response to their loss to Donald Trump in 2016. In his acceptance speech, Perez called for unity between the progressive and more centrist elements within the party, saying that Democrats did not have the luxury to walk out of the room divided. President Trump seemed to welcome Perez's victory as well, tweeting, quote, "Congratulations to Thomas Perez, who has just been named chairman of the DNC. I could not be happier for him or for the Republican Party." White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer made headlines this week when he announced that he would be banning reporters from CNN, the New York Times, Politico, the Los Angeles Times, and BuzzFeed from a so-called gaggle, which is a less formal, non-televised press briefing. The move drew criticism from many mainstream media outlets, with most claiming that the action constituted an attack on free press. President Trump himself seemed to continue the White House's combative stance towards the media, announcing via Twitter that he would not be going to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, an event typically attended by the sitting president. Regardless of President Trump's absence, the White House Correspondents Association said that the dinner would still be held. The White House seemed to signal this week that a federal crackdown on recreational marijuana could be imminent. In a press conference last week, Sean Spicer said the following.
I do believe that you'll see greater enforcement of it because, again, there's a big difference between the medical use, which Congress has through an appropriations rider in 2014, made very clear what the intent of what their intent was. In terms of how the Department of Justice would handle that issue. That's very different than the recreational use, which is something the Department of Justice, I think, will be further looking into.
A crackdown does seem likely, given the new Attorney General Jeff Sessions' hardline stance on marijuana, despite the fact that the administration has previously deferred to states' rights on transgender issues and education. Also this week, we learned that Attorney General Jeff Sessions is reversing an Obama-era policy which ended the use of private prisons to house federal inmates. The move comes despite research that concludes private prisons incur more safety and security problems without considerable cost savings. The private prison industry stands to gain from Sessions' decision, which will boost revenues for an industry that already generates billions in profits per year. Reports have surfaced this week detailing President Trump's proposed budget cuts for the Environmental Protection Agency. The proposal would cut 24% of the agency's $8.1 billion budget, potentially crippling many climate change and environmental cleanup programs. The cuts would be only part of a wider effort to reduce discretionary domestic spending by $54 billion. The ultimate plan would be to apply the $54 billion in cuts to increasing the military budget, despite the fact that the defense spending accounts for nearly half of all discretionary spending. The United States already spends more on defense than the next 7 countries combined and accounts for a whopping 36% of overall military spending worldwide. The proposal would increase the defense budget by nearly 10%. On Wednesday, President Trump delivered his first speech to a joint Congress. The speech struck a more subdued tone while hammering home his America First message and highlighting the accomplishments of the administration so far. Here are some highlights from the speech. Now, the clip is a bit long, but I feel that it really does encapsulate the speech well.
Tonight, as we mark the conclusion of our celebration of Black History Month, we are reminded of our nation's path toward civil rights and the work that still remains to be done. Recent threats targeting Jewish community centers and vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, as well as last week's shooting in Kansas City, remind us that while we may be a nation divided on policies, we are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all of its very ugly forms. What we are witnessing today is the renewal of the American spirit. Our allies will find that America is once again ready to lead. We have begun to drain the swamp of government corruption by imposing a 5-year ban on lobbying by executive branch officials. We have cleared the way for the construction of the Keystone and Dakota Access pipelines. I have further ordered the Departments of Homeland Security and Justice, along with the Department of State and the Director of National Intelligence, to coordinate an aggressive strategy to dismantle the criminal cartels that have spread all across our nation. We will stop the drugs from pouring into our country and poisoning our youth, and we will expand treatment for those who have become so badly addicted. We want all Americans to succeed, but that can't happen in an environment of lawless chaos. We must restore integrity and the rule of law at our borders. For that reason, we will soon begin the construction of a great wall along our southern border. We are also taking strong measures to protect our nation from radical Islamic terrorism. It is not compassionate, but reckless to allow uncontrolled entry from places where proper vetting cannot occur. I have also imposed new sanctions on entities and individuals who support Iran's ballistic missile program and reaffirmed our unbreakable alliance with the State of Israel. To launch our national rebuilding, I will be asking Congress to approve legislation that produces a $1 trillion investment in infrastructure of the United States, financed through both public and private capital, creating millions of new jobs. I believe strongly in free trade, but it also has to be fair trade. It's been a long time since we had fair trade. The first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, warned that the abandonment of the protective policy by the American government will produce want and ruin among our people. Lincoln was right, and it's time we heeded his advice and his words. Tonight, I am also calling on this Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare. Obamacare premiums nationwide have increased by double and triple digits. As an example, Arizona went up 116% last year alone. Remember, when you were told that you could keep your doctor and keep your plan. We now know that all of those promises have been totally broken. Obamacare is collapsing, and we must act decisively to protect all Americans. We should ensure that Americans with pre-existing conditions have access to coverage and that we have a stable transition for Americans currently enrolled in the healthcare exchanges. Education is the civil rights issue of our time. I am calling upon members of both parties to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African American and Latino children. To break the cycle of poverty, we must also break the cycle of violence. The murder rate in 2015 experienced its largest single-year increase in nearly half a century. In Chicago, more than 4,000 people were shot last year alone, and the murder rate so far this year has been even higher. To create this future, we must work with, not against, the men and women of law enforcement. I have ordered the Department of Homeland Security to create an office to serve American victims. The office is called VOICE, Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement. We are providing a voice to those who have been ignored by our media and silenced by special interests. I am sending Congress a budget that rebuilds the military, eliminates the defense sequester, and calls for one of the largest increases in national defense spending in American history. We are blessed to be joined tonight by Corinne Owens, the widow of U.S. Navy Special Operator, Senior Chief William Ryan Owens. Ryan died as he lived, a warrior and a hero, battling against terrorism and securing our nation. Ryan was a part of a highly successful raid that generated large amounts of vital intelligence that will lead to many more victories in the future against our enemy. Ryan's legacy is etched into eternity. Thank you. To those allies who wonder what kind of a friend America will be, look no further than the heroes who wear our uniform. But our partners must meet their financial obligations. And now, based on our very strong and frank discussions, they are beginning to do just that. In fact, I can tell you the money is pouring in. Very nice. I am asking all members of Congress to join me in dreaming big and bold and daring things for our country. I am asking everyone watching tonight to seize this moment, believe in yourselves, believe in your future, and believe once more in America. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless the United States.
If you'd like to listen to the entire speech, there is a link in the description. President Trump's picks for Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and the Secretary of the Department of Energy were confirmed this week. Ben Carson, a retired neurosurgeon, was confirmed as HUD Secretary by a vote of 58 to 41, despite having no experience in running a federal agency. Rick Perry, who once called for the elimination of the very department he has been picked to lead, was confirmed as Energy Secretary with a 62 to 37 vote. Mr. Perry famously forgot the name of the department during a Republican primary debate when he was asked to list departments he would eliminate.
As a former federal prosecutor for 12 years, Attorney General for 2 years, I know and believe very deeply in the rule of law and the fact that honest and testimony is required if we're to have justice in America. So the problem is not the personal conduct. People on both sides of the aisle have failed in their dedication to their families over and over again. We know that to be true. But the fact is that we're dealing and wrestling with allegations that suggest perjury or obstruction of justice. The president has a full and should be given a full opportunity to respond to that, but fundamentally we're going to have to wrestle with that, and that issue will not go away. There's matter. And when anybody is called to court and asked to tell the truth, they have to tell the truth. And I'm telling you, as a person who spent my career in court, if we ever get to the point in this country where just because you're a high public official, they think you have a right to tell the truth when you're called to court, we're going to lose one of the most precious heritages we ever have had, and that is equal justice under law.
That clip is of Attorney General Jeff Sessions remarking on Bill Clinton's testimony regarding the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Well, it seems the tables have turned. Reports have surfaced this week revealing that Mr. Sessions had met with Russian ambassadors twice during President Trump's election campaign. However, during his confirmation hearing for Attorney General, it seems that Mr. Sessions perjured himself by denying that he had met with Russian officials at all last year. On Thursday, Mr. Sessions recused himself from any probes into Russian interference in the 2016 elections amid calls from top Democrats for him to resign. Well, that's all the news I can handle. Adam, it's over to you, you racist xenophobe.
Thanks, John. Yes, it's true. I'm a racist xenophobe, apparently. News to me, but we'll be unpacking that one a little bit later on. This week, all of our news seems to be coming out of the UK, at least from here in Europe. Not to worry though, our next episode of the Commoners podcast will be our Dutch election special. It'll be Europe's first post-Brexit, post-Trump election with a burgeoning right-wing populist party expected to become the biggest party in the Dutch Parliament, so don't miss it. It will be available in your podcast feed on Monday morning. First to Northern Ireland, where today they are currently voting in the Northern Irish Assembly elections. Northern Ireland is the troublesome youngest sibling of the UK's four sister nations, as she can't quite decide whether she's British or Irish. Because of this indecision, not to mention decades of violence, Northern Ireland has developed a rather unusual political system to maintain peace between the region's Unionist Protestant British community and the Republican Catholic Irish community. The Northern Irish Assembly functions essentially in the same way as most parliaments. The country is divided into constituencies. Constituencies vote for their representatives, in this case MLAs. The representatives sit in Parliament, and from the Parliament's ranks the government is chosen. Now, in most parliamentary democracies, the leader of the government is the leader of the largest party in the Parliament. They then get to choose their cabinet from among their fellow parliamentarians and set about governing the country. But in Northern Ireland, the leader of the government is not one MLA, but two. One from the largest party representing each community. Together, and only together, do they form the head of the government. The office of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister. Now, the system overlooks democratic majorities for the sake of peace. It forces the two communities to work together for the sake of the region as a whole. And again, it is only when the two are in office together that the government can be formed. This is important because that brings us to January of this year. Now, in January, it was revealed that the Unionist First Minister, the DUP leader Arlene Foster, had been embroiled in a major scandal involving the renewable heat incentive. Sounds fascinating. This was when she was a cabinet minister. Now, this was a major bungle which cost the Northern Irish taxpayer £400 million. After having his calls for the First Minister to stand down ignored, the Deputy First Minister and leader of the Nationalists' largest party, Sinn Féin, a man called Martin McGuinness, he himself resigned, citing the DUP's mismanagement of funds. Now, due to the complex nature of the co-head executive office, if one half of the dynamic duo is left empty for more than 7 days, a new parliamentary election is called, and after McGuinness stood down, a full week passed, and so here we are today. Now, Northern Ireland is currently wrapping up voting as I'm speaking here just now, as I'm recording on Thursday night. But by the time you're listening to this on Friday, we should know what the result is and what the new government will look like. And so if you are interested, do a Google search and see how things have transpired. However, from this side of the result, Sinn Féin have already said that they won't enter into the executive again with Arlene Foster, the scandal-embroiled First Minister. And given that Northern Ireland is a very tribal place, Sinn Féin and the DUP being the antagonistic political successors of the IRA and the Ulster paramilitaries, given that they're expected to win again by the same margins, we can expect the same old fighting and baiting and feigned disgust to continue, all to the detriment of an efficient Northern Ireland. Now, even in the region of the UK with the lowest GDP, the poorest healthcare system, in a region that voted to remain in the Brexit referendum but will ultimately be pulled out anyway, Northern Ireland will continue to be Northern Ireland. It's not a place for change, and it certainly won't change this time. Moving on back to Great Britain, and specifically to the House of Lords. Now, for any bill to pass through Parliament, it must also be deliberated and approved by the House of Lords, the UK Parliament's upper chamber. Unlike in many other liberal democratic nations, the House of Lords is an unelected chamber with the power to deliberate, amend, and essentially refuse to pass any and all legislation from the elected House of Commons, and is in general an all-round reprehensible affront to modern democracy. And it's obviously within the nature of centuries-old political arrangements that there will be a few oddities about the place. Now, with 804 members, it's the largest body in the political system in Britain. There are 90 hereditary peers whose offspring literally take their place in the political system as a birthright, and there are 26 Lords Spiritual, the 26 most senior clergymen of the Church of England. The rest are appointed for life by party leaders and are often major party donors or long-time politicians looking for a retirement plan. Hooray for secular democracy. And yet, the Article 50 Bill, which gives the British government the authority to begin the Brexit process, was passed by the House of Commons in early February without amendment. This meant unlimited negotiating power for the government, no parliamentary oversight in negotiations, no further guarantee of parliamentary votes on Brexit, and no guarantees for EU citizens. EU citizens have the right to live and work in the EU, anywhere in the EU, any nation in the EU, but with the UK Brexiting itself, many EU citizens are concerned about their future right to residency. And for many, the UK is their home, it's their livelihood, their friends and their communities are here. This week, the House of Lords provided a significant hurdle to the Article 50 bill by amending it to include a guarantee that EU citizens already living in the UK be given the right to permanent residency. Leave it to the unelected, frustratingly old-fashioned bastion of classism to be the progressive, people-centric protector of the nation. Now, lobbying has already begun to ensure that there are enough votes to keep the amendment as it returns to the House of Commons for approval. It has an uphill climb, and the Commons does technically have the ultimate veto, and it has already threatened to use it. Technically, the Commons can abolish the House of Lords. I'd say let's not get too hasty, but we'll see. Finally, spring political party conferences have started here in Scotland. Conference season is when all of the political parties take a long weekend to meet together and make party-wide decisions about direction and policy. The Scottish Labour Party kicked things off for us last weekend. As I've mentioned before on Political Animals, UK Labour under Jeremy Corbyn has to appease two wildly opposing sides of his support base simultaneously. The white working class of Northern England and Wales who voted for Brexit, and the cosmopolitan young professional and middle class in the UK's south that voted for Remain. Scottish Labour represent a shadow of things to come for UK Labour if they fail at this. For decades, Scottish Labour was a political juggernaut here in Scotland. After the independence referendum, however, Scottish Labour haven't been able to find their place in the new political spectrum. Like UK Labour's current problem, Scottish Labour's broad church voters split on the independence question, despite their party advocating for the union. After the vote, they've been unable to come down solidly on either side, pro-independence or pro-union, and have siphoned off much of their support to the SNP and in some cases for the real hardcore unionists to the Conservative Party. But finally, Scottish Labour, at their conference this weekend, 2.5 years after the independence referendum, decided that their stance on Scotland's constitutional place in the UK will be federalism. Now, federalism is a... You know what? No. I can't even be bothered with this. Labour as a whole is going the way of the telegraph and the compact disc, both here in Scotland and in the rest of the UK, because Labour is broad church and they've stretched themselves too thin across the political spectrum, so much so that in a rather cliched but nonetheless true way, by standing for everyone, they stand for no one and nothing. The era of the working class came to an end under Margaret Thatcher. No longer do unions have the power and the influence that they once did, and no longer do people really identify with the working class. People have become too well off. Blair understood this. New Labour understood this. Blair targeted the centre of the political spectrum, bringing the party in from the left, becoming the party of both the working class and the middle class. The problem was that the economic situation helped along by the Blair government and the successive Brown government, which included tax incentives for corporations, further globalisation, further integration with the EU, it only favoured one of the two in the happy marriage of Labour support base. Now, while the middle class could buy interesting European food and go on holiday to Mallorca or Malaga once a year, the working classes saw their wages shrink in real terms and their jobs put at risk by rising immigration. UK Labour can't hold on to its two leashes now, and it faces the same fate that the Scottish Labour Party did after the independence referendum. Scottish Labour have been decimated by poor decision making and weak leadership. And it only continues here. For one, federalisation benefits the three smaller countries of the UK, but it would lead to a huge democratic deficiency in England. Do you know what the difference is in population size between Scotland and England? It's a full order of magnitude, 5 million to 53 million. Good luck convincing the English voter that they need to give Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland a veto on all legislation passed in the UK. Second, Scottish Labour have been inept at providing alternative policy to the current governing SNP minority government. Both the SNP and government are left-leaning parties with incredibly similar policies. Scottish Labour's groundbreaking policy platform in the last Scottish parliamentary election was a 1p tax increase. Don't go crazy there, guys. Therefore, if they want to prove themselves, they need to be creative, competent leaders in tune with the Scottish people. But, third and finally, they done youfed big time. For their spring conference, they managed to book Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London. Now, Sadiq is the Anglo-Pakistani Mayor of London, who currently has the biggest mandate to govern of any Labour politician, having been elected to lead the London metropolis of 7 million people last year, facing a harsh and racist campaign that aimed at his Muslim faith and his Pakistani heritage. The guy understands racism and prejudice. However, in a speech to be given at the Scottish Labour conference last weekend, he was to say the following, and I quote this from the speech released as an excerpt on his own Twitter account at Sadiq Khan. Listen to this. The world is becoming an increasingly turbulent and divided place. We've seen Brexit, President Trump elected in the United States, and the rise of right-wing populism and narrow nationalist parties around the world. It's up to us, whether in Scotland or in London, to fight this trend. The last thing we need now is to pit different parts of our country or sections of our society against each other, or to further fuel division or seek separation. There's no difference, this is the kicker, there's no difference between those who try to divide us on the basis of whether we're English or Scottish and those who try to divide us on the basis of our background, our race or religion. So apparently, because I think that Scotland can govern itself, I am equal to and as divisive as a racist. The United Kingdom has taken a hard turn to the right, to isolationism, to xenophobia, and this numpty comes up to Scotland to tell independence-backing Scots that they are the divisive ones. Scottish independence is a progressive ideal. It's an opportunity to build a state that is receptive to the outsider, that pools resources, and that gives dignity to everyone. I argue for independence to break free from isolationism and xenophobia. I want an independent, progressive, people-centric state whose first priority is justice and equality. Jinx to hang. Nothing sums up Labour and Scottish Labour more than this moment, an inept grasp on the primary concern in the current national zeitgeist, an inability to challenge creeping fear and hate-mongering, and above all, insulting the people that you have to win over to win elections. So yes, John, apparently I'm a racist and a xenophobe. Good grief. Well, that is it from me. Follow Commoners Podcast on Twitter at CommonersPod for news and updates. Don't forget to catch our new Commoners Podcast episode this Monday as we dive into real racists and xenophobes in the Dutch election. Until then, don't vote for Scottish Labour.